So next up, we have Cody Booth, the Assistant Director of the Trust Land Management Division at OSLI. And while he just gets a little situated, I'm going to talk a little bit about after Cody. So we have a reception just outside in the lobby. Students from the Haub School of Environment and Natural Resources have been working this whole semester on projects related to state trust lands. They're going to have posters up, and they're really interested in sort of talking to you all and getting some feedback and learning from you. So I hope you'll engage with them. We also have a cash bar that I hope you'll engage with if you so choose to, and some light appetizers. Last announcement then, if you'd like to continue the conversation, because I feel like all of these sessions have been too short to get the full depth of knowledge from everyone, we have space reserved at Altitude downtown. It's buy your own dinner, but we have that space available, so you can just go, say you're with the State Trust Lands Forum, and you'll be with like-minded people. So with that, Cody Booth.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Cody Booth. I'm the Assistant Director for the Trust Land Management Division. And you've heard a lot of people speak about the Kelly Parcel today. For those who haven't or don't know what the Kelly Parcel is, I'm excited to explain this to you. For those who already do have a general understanding, I'm going to try and bring some additional context into it that maybe you don't know. And so Jason Crowder touched on the trust land management objectives. I'm not going to go through these one by one, but just note when we're talking about the Kelly Parcel, it was a land transaction and specifically a disposal, and that was evaluated based on these trust land management objectives. So talking about the Kelly Parcel, that was a disposal, and I want to just run through that particular process. So typically with a disposal, as you're looking at a proposal from either an applicant or even the director has the authority to identify a parcel of state trust lands for disposal. And once it's identified, then it goes into what we call Category 1, and that's where staff internally are doing a preliminary analysis of that to try and see if there is potential to meet those trust objectives. And if we determine that, yeah, there is potential here, then we're going to take it to our internal review team meeting, and that's made up of the director, and we propose to them, hey, we did this preliminary analysis. We feel that these are the trust objectives that are going to be met. These are the attributes of this particular disposal. Would you like to move this into the next category? And if the answer is yes, then it goes to a detailed analysis phase, but the answer could obviously be no as well, in which case that gets removed off our category lists and it's not up for discussion any further. So once we get the approval, we're going to take that to the detailed analysis phase, and that detailed analysis is largely going to be based around the appraisal of that property. And there also going to be solicitation from sister agencies. We're going to reach out to Game and Fish Department for their comments. We're also going to go to state parks and cultural resources for their evaluation as well. Once that is complete, we publish that detailed analysis. We kick that over to our Board of Land Commissioners. And what we also do is we kick that over to the appropriate county commissioners. We put it on our website, we do a Gov delivery blast, and we solicit comments. So that publishing of that detailed analysis really kicks off our 60-day, a minimum 60-day public comment period. And within that 60-day public comment period, we also hold a hearing, and that hearing is to be held within the county that's affected by that disposal. Further, once we get all the public comments, we hold that hearing, we take it to the board for final consideration. And when we take it to the board, we take it with that whole package, all of the comments, a summary of those comments, and we give them all the information transparently so that they can make an informed decision ultimately on whether that should move forward to the auction or whether it shouldn't. And so there's a dash line after the board consideration as well, because there's the opportunity to either approve that or disapprove it. If it's approved, in a typical scenario, it goes to advertisement of that public auction. After that 30-day advertisement, we take it to that public auction. And then once there's a successful bidder, we would go into closing. So background, just a little bit of context on Grand Teton National Park. It wasn't just the Kelly parcel that we were discussing since 2003. There were 3 other parcels involved as well. And I won't go over all the history on this timeline, but there's a couple of things that I want to point out. These conversations and the initial action that started the process for acquisition to the Department of Interior from State Trust Lands began in 2003, but the conversation took place well before that. So in 2003 is really when the federal government authorized acquisition of those 4 parcels that were identified, and that was through a donation, purchase, exchange. And then you move into 2012, and that's when the sale of the Jackson Lake parcel happened. And then in 2013, the Snake River parcel was sold to the Department of Interior. And then moving on, there was a time period where we were looking at the Antelope Flats parcel. It was $46 million, and the federal government said, hey, we can't come up with this money. What are some other ideas that we can look at here? And they, at that time, looked at doing an exchange. There was a lot of moving parts, as you can imagine, with an exchange of that value with the federal government, and they ultimately determined to forego pursuing an exchange. And they received donations in addition to the money that they were able to raise to ultimately purchase that Antelope Flats parcel. And then moving on to 2004 is when we see the Kelly parcel. So this is a figure that shows those 4 parcels and where they lie and the amounts that they were sold at. And then specific to the Kelly parcel, 14 miles northeast of Jackson, as you've heard, 640 acres. One of the things that made this prime to go to the federal government, it's its proximity to Grand Teton National Park, Bridger Teton National Forest, and the Elk Refuge, accessible via the Bow-Routt Road. And the development was limited by a scenic easement. So there was a 1,000-foot width scenic easement along that Bow-Routt Road, and that equates to 156 acres. And so that's one of the limitations that we had on this particular property to generate revenue off of it, other than being surrounded by federal government land. So the existing uses on that property were grazing and agriculture, easements, there was a pipeline, that roadway, and that scenic easement, and then there were temporary use permits as well. So in yellow, you're going to see that Kelly parcel and its proximity to Grand Teton National Park, Bridger Teton National Forest to the east and to the south, and then the National Elk Refuge. And then this figure just zooms out a little bit so you can see a little bit more context as far as Yellowstone Grand Teton National Park and where those forests lie. Talking about that scenic easement, we drew it in on this figure, and I'll move on to this next slide because I think it shows that roadway just a little bit better in that transition of yellow and red line running through the south portion of that property. So that was what was tied up in that particular easement. So category 1, this took place December 31st, 2016, is moved by the director to category 2 in 2021. And then the detailed analysis was published October 2nd, 2023. We solicited public comments to December 1, 2023. And as mentioned previously, we determined that this wasn't just a project specific to Teton County. This was a state project. And so we wanted to go around the state of Wyoming and solicit comments from a multitude of different locations, and there were 4 in number. We ultimately took that analysis and those comments to the Board of Land Commissioners on December 7th, 2023. The action on that board matter with the recommendation to approve the sale of the Kelly parcel at $80 million was ultimately tabled, and it was tabled with the discussion of, hey, can we pursue an exchange for lands in the Powder River Basin? What might that look like? So a committee was formed at that particular time to look at those lands and what that exchange would look like. Ultimately, we took it back to the board November 7th, 2024, and the board approved the disposal of the Kelly parcel. So That finalized at the end of 2024, beginning of 2025. Just touch real quickly on the appraised value. There was a third-party appraisal that was completed on this. They determined that particular value was $62.5 million. And then pursuant to House Enrolled Act 50, there was direct sale authority to work directly with the Department of Interior. So one nuance with our disposals is we have to take those to a public auction. That's written in statute and rule. So what that House Enrolled Act does is it says, no, you get to work directly with the Department of Interior, because that's where we feel this land should lie. Those individuals should hold this property. And then it also put the stipulation that we weren't going to sell it to them for any less than $100 million. So when we look at the disposal and some of the merits, one of the things we look at is revenue generation. And so the existing annual income was that grazing lease and some temporary use permits. And that ultimately equated to a little under $3,000 a year. And that goes into the Permanent Land Income Fund and is then potentially made available by legislature to K through 12 education. So we had a comparison here of if we were to hold that property for 10 years and not sell it, and then if we were to dispose of that property, and what we took into consideration were the appreciation rates. So you'll see a range of 3.5% to 7.2%, and where those appreciation ranges come from is National Agriculture Statistics Service. Vacant agriculture land is appreciating at 3.52% is what they estimated. But in the appraisal, it said 0.6% each month is what they estimated this property to appreciate at. So if we were to hold on to that property, we wouldn't receive that $22 million to $42 million for K through 12 education. That would just be the property value increase that would be realized there. And then also that takes into consideration that revenue from the grazing lease and the temporary use permits I previously mentioned. So when we compare that to the disposal, we worked with the Treasurer's Office in their investment of the Permanent Land Fund, which is invested by the Treasurer, was earning 6.4%. So when we look at that on a 10-year basis, that equates to $64 million. And that is available for K through 12 education through the state. So when we're talking about our fiduciary responsibility and objectives for the trust, we're looking at that $22 to $42 million that's not realized for K through 12 education versus the $64 million that ultimately would be. And then just to bring it full circle with all of those parcels, this is just a general figure that shows the annual earnings from the sale of those 4 parcels. And what I'd note at the very bottom with the addition of the Kelly Parcel, we're estimating the annual revenue available for our trust beneficiaries at $9.5 million a year. And so how does the Powder River Basin acquisition really come into this? And I'll point out Wyoming Statute 94715K and O. What those do is they allow the funds received from the sales of state trust lands to be used to purchase land and improvements within Wyoming. And that's both deeded property and federal property that could potentially be purchased. So when we have this idea of the Powder River Basin, this conversation took place and has been taking place for many years now. And then having this $100 million available to potentially be used to acquire lands is where the Kelly Parcel meets with the Powder River Basin. And just some stats on the Powder River Basin. Why is this area important? And it's specifically important for oil and gas. It's determined to have significant reserves and be able to produce significant returns. And so that's what we have identified, particularly with respect to the Powder River Basin, is there is a lot of potential opportunity for revenue generation in this particular area. And another thing is we've got state lands in and amongst this area, and they're difficult to produce oil and gas on because they're surrounded by federal land, and those federal lands might be tied up in litigation. There's a specific nomination process that they go through for their leases, and sometimes those leases aren't issued. So if we were to acquire these lands, it could potentially free up development in this particular area with high opportunity. So to identify these lands that were ripe potentially for acquisition, we first solicited advice from several different producers, and we said, hey, within the Powder River Basin, where could we generate revenue immediately if we were to acquire these lands? And then additionally, where are these reserves that could potentially be developed? So we really wanted to understand, where are these resources? Where do these exist? Where should we prioritize looking at acquisition? And another thing is, we looked at what is producing currently, and where, and that was going to be helpful in understanding where we could immediately generate revenue. And we need to go through what's feasible to acquire from the BLM. So we look at their RMP. Within their RMP, they indicate property that is ripe for disposal. So what BLM lands have potential reserves and potential for development and potential for revenue generation immediately, in conjunction with what might the BLM be willing to divest of. So those are the highest priority lands that we're looking there. And then additionally, we're taking into consideration 1,280 acres. And why that's important is that's an appropriate size for horizontal drilling technology. And horizontal drilling technology, if you don't already know, there are significant economic benefits to that. In addition, there are benefits to the resources. Instead of putting multiple oil and gas wells in well pads around a particular property, you can have one location and you can horizontally drill from that location. So it cuts down on the resources that could potentially be impacted by that particular use. So we were developing these priorities thinking that we want to see 1,280 acres combined lands for these drilling and spacing units. And we already own several 640-acre parcels. So the number one priority is, where do BLM lands lie adjacent to state trust lands such that we can create that 1,280-acre contiguous parcel that would be ripe for development? The second priority would be, okay, where do BLM lands lie in conjunction to deeded property that could be used to create that 1,280-acre drilling and spacing unit as well? And then the third priority is, we're looking at BLM land adjacent to state and deeded land with potential, but they're not on the RMP for disposal. So where we're at right now with identifying those lands is, we're working with the BLM. We've signed a letter of intent with the state director there, and we're trying to finalize these lands so that they can do a cursory feasibility analysis and determine whether those lands are ripe for disposal. That's something they want to dispose. And the last thing I would say about the Powder River Basin and the potential acquisition is that this is a very initial step. So we don't even have the lands fully identified yet. There's still going to be back and forth with the BLM that we need to do to identify these lands that we ultimately would have to study. And so there is going to be public engagement, and we're thinking about that constantly, and we're going to try and take the appropriate methodology to have that public engagement in those communications as necessary. So just an idea right now. It's initial in its steps, but wanted to make that disclaimer as well. So in conclusion, Kelly Parcel was generating a little less than $3,000 a year for our trust beneficiaries, with an estimated appreciation of 3.5% to 7.2%. The sale resulted in, or we estimate to result in, a 6.4% return on investment. And we expect in a 10-year span that would equate to $64 million for our trust beneficiaries. So not only do the proceeds from the sale of the Kelly Parcel generate significant revenue, it is preserved for future generations to come within the Department of Interior. So with that, I will stand for questions, but I'll skip to the next slide. Don't ask me about these arrows or where they go. I stole it from Jason Crowder, so save those questions for him later. But just want to provide our contact information up here. If you don't already have it, write it down. We'd be happy to talk to you.
Hey, Cody. Thanks so much. To clarify, with the money that's been earned from the Kelly Parcel, is that currently earning interest right now?
Yeah, that $100 million is being invested by the treasurer in the permanent land fund at an estimated return of 6.4%.
So they're not like losing out on potential revenues by like considering this land sale in the interim.
Correct. That's correct. It is currently being invested.
Okay, thanks.
Do you know what the return on investment is on the existing oil and gas leases in the Powder River Basin, and how does it compare to the 6.1 million that the treasurer is currently earning?
And that's a great question, and one I don't have the answer to right now. We haven't even identified those lands specifically, so that is going to be a part of our process when we do identify them. And we have worked with the federal government, and they are ripe for acquisition. That is absolutely going to be a component of that detailed analysis that we'll fully flesh out. But we don't have that answer. I don't have that answer for you at this point in time. As far as royalty and the amounts, so I don't know the dollar amount on a per parcel basis, but how we have structured those leases is the royalty is going to be based on 16 2/3% of their sales, or 12.5%.
So quick question, or maybe a comment on that, something that I think it would be helpful that I get a question on all the time is what are those other traditional values pre-sale of the Kelly parcel did we retain as part of that sale? And so I think that's important to a lot of the public in Wyoming. There's a perception now that none of those traditional uses, AKA the ag lease and the hunting, would still be reserved on that parcel. But could you just expand on that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. So in a typical disposal, the land is sold subject to existing leases and easements, and that's exactly what happened with respect to the Kelly parcel. And legislature stepped in and they further put that into the legislation that they built, and they said, yep, we want to see grazing and agriculture leasing continue on this particular property. So thank you for bringing that up, and that is something that is retained on the Kelly parcel. And furthermore, yep, they're going to continue to allow hunting as well.
Excuse me. Two questions, but they're both related. You mentioned the acquisition priority being the Powder River Basin, specific to the Kelly parcel proceeds, if I heard that correctly. Are there other priority areas or other areas outside of the Powder River Basin that kind of fit into that issue of state lands would like to acquire other parcels elsewhere, maybe even still within the Powder River Basin or somewhere else? And then a follow-on question, and I heard one of the this morning's discussion, I don't know if this is true or not, but it's kind of interesting if it is that in the Anadarko portfolio sale that the state pursued aggressively 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, whatever that was. You know, that's all out in the public domain and what happened there. But my understanding is that there was somewhere around 70,000 acres that wasn't sold by Anadarko. And does the state have an interest in that portfolio if it's available?
Yeah, great question. And when we relate the two, this $100 million from the Kelly parcel, specifically, I'm saying that we have the authority in statute to potentially use that money for that acquisition of additional lands. Further, we've got the directive of the Board of Land Commissioners. They said, hey, we want to explore this opportunity of the Powder River Basin. So that directive is coming from the Board of Land Commissioners, and we're carrying that out as the administrative arm as best as we can. As far as additional properties that we're looking to acquire, we've got 7 acquisitions that are listed on our website as well, or disposals listed on our website as well, and there's 4 exchanges and there's 1 acquisition. So a lot of our land transactions come to us from applications, and we'd love to get more proactive as to identify these properties for acquisition. So as far as these 70,000 acres that you've mentioned, I don't know anything about them, but certainly if they're prime for acquisition and maybe they meet the objective of our trust beneficiaries, that's something we could absolutely consider in the future.
One more question? Fantastic. Thank you, Cody. So before I release you all to the reception, I just wanted to say something quickly about tomorrow. So tomorrow, this room is going to be split into 3 rooms. There'll be sort of air walls up. And the intention for that is to really we learned a lot today. Maybe we got some good ideas. We began to dig into some of these questions. And maybe you've hopefully also been having some preliminary conversations with folks during breaks and at your table. So tomorrow we want to actually dig into those and sort of prioritize some issues that we want to address. And then in the afternoon, really start to try to come up with solutions. So there will be, in the schedule, it tells you which room is for what topic. There will also be signs outside the doors when you come in tomorrow morning. And then I just want to make a note that for simplicity's sake, we decided to divide up the rooms by various emerging uses we heard from OSLI that they were receiving interest in and wanted to learn more about if they were potentially useful and something that they should pursue and what that would look like. But as we've heard throughout today, new and emerging uses can be compatible with existing uses, but they can also sometimes be in conflict. So I just want to be clear that existing users, all of you in the room, we really want your perspectives to be in each room to be able to both express concerns about why something might be difficult to pursue, but also to come up with creative ideas for how it could be mutually beneficial. So if you could do me a favor and try to distribute yourself through the rooms so that we make sure we have your perspective in these small group discussions. And that's all I have for you. Any questions? All right, thank you so much. Enjoy your evening.